I just can't do it anymore. I have nothing left.
Between the divorce, the cancer, your mom dying, and being laid off, I know it feels like you're going through a lot. Believe me, I have been there. Just remember, when God closes a door, He opens a window. And never forget, God never gives you more than you can handle.
God never said that. Oh, I've got another one if you want to take a shot. Yeah, they come as a pair. Bring it.
So there we go. This morning we come into the second in the series that we started, God Never Said That. And and I chose to use that bumper because there's a reality to that, and yet there's a kind of irony that's involved with that kind of leading that we used this morning. When those of us who get to preach each Sunday, most of us, when we do preach, we really are preaching to ourselves. The stuff that we love to talk about, the stuff that we share, the stuff that we preach about is often really relevant to our own lives. And sometimes I feel like when I am preaching, I feel like I'm also listening because every now and again I would say something that I know that isn't particularly from my frame of reference. Perhaps it's an inspired word or whatever. And it's a journey that we'll be entering, that we'll be going through ourselves. And sometimes people come to me after a service and say, you were speaking directly to me. And when people say that, well, it's all about the work of God. It's all about the Spirit of God who knows where we are in our journey and the impact that has on us at that particular kind of moment in time. For me, this particular Sunday, this particular message, it really has such an intense impact upon what we are going through, Christine and I and others and many in our community this morning, and I'll explain that in just a minute. Because we're dealing with this misbelief that is coming to culture, this misbelief that says that God won't give you more than you can handle. And this is really quite a massive misbelief, and it really is one that needs attention. There's just so much wrong with this statement. First of all, the idea that God is the one who gives us the stuff, that God is the one who's bringing to us the things that cause us to despair, to feel overwhelmed. It's like God is the source of that stuff. That's the first thing that perhaps is wrong with it. Secondly, this idea that we're going to go through life and we're going to be able to handle stuff. We're going to be able to get it right. Maybe whether it's in our own strength or in God's strength, but that life and what God's going to allow is that everything that comes to us, we're going to be able to manage and to handle. And once again, that's simply not true. It's just not true. If you look at the Bible is one story after another story of people who couldn't handle the stuff. You take Gideon, for example. Gideon, one of the judges of Israel, God calls him to take on the enemy, and he feels completely overwhelmed. The Bible describes him as one who's threshing wheat in a winepress. Why do you thresh wheat in a winepress? The reason is because you're too scared. You're feeling overwhelmed. God calls him to do this incredible task, and Gideon he feels completely unable. He goes through a thing called the fleece. He tests God and goes through this whole process. We know Moses. Moses also reached a place where he had too much that he couldn't handle. He tries to intervene in between the Egyptian taskmasters and the Jewish slaves. And he tries to intervene and gets it all wrong. And then kind of wanders off. And we know that Moses reaches the depths of despair because he starts working for his father-in-law. Nobody chooses to work for their father-in-law. It's when you've come to the end of yourself, and that's where Moses is. And God calls Moses miraculously out of this, speaks to him from a burning bush, and he says, "Now, Moses, I want you to go back to Egypt. And I want you there to bring my children from bondage into a promised land that I have for them." And Moses says, "I don't want to go. I can't go. I can't talk. This is a job that's too big for me." We see the disciples, and I'll use the illustration a little later on, how they feel overwhelmed and how they could. And Jesus himself, when we read the story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus says, if this cup can pass from me, this is overwhelming. I feel like I cannot handle this. So this misbelief, where does it come from? How come it kind of gets so much traction? And in a sense, we seek from a pure motive to comfort people by saying, God won't give you more than you can handle. Well, it comes from 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13. And it says, the temptations in your life are no different from others' experience. And God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. When you are tempted, He will show you a way out so that you will endure. And so the scripture is talking about a temptation. It's talking about what others have been tempted with and potentially what you've been tempted with, and that in the temptation He'll provide a way of escape. And maybe you want to draw a parallel between hard times and temptations, but essentially what this verse is speaking about, it's speaking about the fact that people have been through stuff, and you're in stuff now, and God will give you a way of escape through the stuff that you may be able to endure it. But in essence, it's not talking directly into this idea, and you can see where the idea comes from, that potentially God won't give you more than you can handle. But the fact of the matter is that for most of us, we're going to experience something that more than we can handle. And so this morning, more than try to preach to you or teach to you, I really just kind of want to share as a pastor this morning some of the struggles around what do we do when there's something that happens to us that's more than we can handle. And so I'm going to kind of, if you don't mind, just share with you from that perspective. Because for me this past week, something happened that really, for me, is more than I can handle. And over all the years, as I've had the opportunity to journey with people and to attempt to be a pastor to them, perhaps this last week is up there in one of the most difficult weeks in regards to that. Because right now, there's a huge community of people experiencing the reality of, can I handle this? Is this not too much for me to handle, the experience of what it's about? Let me explain a little bit. Last Sunday, if you were here last Sunday, you'll know that I was here. And I did all 3 services in the morning. And so I kind of decided that I'd skip the church services in the evening. What we like to do here as the staff of Grace, we say to folk, we need you to attend at least 3 services, maybe 4, but not always do you need to come to all 5 on a Sunday. Imagine that, coming to 5 services on a Sunday. What a way to spend your day. But anyway, so Christine was helping with the worship service in Riverside on Sunday night, and I was at home on my own on Sunday night. And it's quite a nice thing. Very seldom am I ever at home on a Sunday night, and even less so am I at home on my own sometimes. I mean, it's really, I knew she was coming back with supper, so I wasn't completely in despair at that stage. But at 8 o'clock, I got a text message from a friend of mine who was asking me to pray. What had happened is that his daughter was diagnosed with a bladder infection on the Wednesday, and on the Saturday she was admitted into hospital, and on the Sunday she was in ICU in a fairly critical condition. Now for these parents of this young girl, for their friends and for me, there were kind of extra alarm bells that began to ring for us. The reason is that 6 years prior to this event, 6 years ago, my friend and his at that stage, 2 teenage daughters were in a motor car accident, and the oldest daughter tragically was killed in that car accident. And now the second daughter, the youngest daughter, 23 years old, was lying in ICU on Sunday night in a critical condition. I'm not going to go into the details of all what took place, but essentially on Monday morning, this young girl had died. She had passed away. And for this family to have lost both their daughters in a space of 6 years really was too much for them to handle. We all, the community that are around them, would say, well, how are they going to handle this? Their community, their friends, The mother in question, she leads a support group in our church for parents who've lost children, particularly for mothers who've lost children. And as we gathered in this hospital room with lots of people and support, half of the mothers there had been through something like this before. And so today, this mom and dad, this community, for me as their friend and their pastor, it feels, and it is, almost too much for us to handle. You understand? Now my guess is that as I speak about that this morning, my guess is that there are people sitting right here who've experienced similar things, perhaps even more tragic things. I don't know everybody personally on that level, but my guess is that if you haven't, at some stage in your life, experienced something of this nature, then you would be the exception, because most of us in this room have experienced something and perhaps are currently experiencing something in our lives that we feel is too much for us to handle. And as a pastor, I don't have good explanations for these things. I can't tell you why children get a diagnosis or this family have gone through what they had. And even if I thought I did have a good explanation, in the light of what's going on and the hurt and the pain and the disappointment, whatever answer there is, it's usually it just sounds light, it sounds trite, it sounds glib, it doesn't always necessarily help. So how do we process this stuff, you know? For me, there came a glimmer of light as we had gathered as a large group of people in the hospital reception area on Monday morning. There's this glimmer of light that came to me from the most unlikely source. As we were kind of mourning and comforting one another, this friend of mine showed me an SMS that he had got from another friend who wasn't in the Durban area. And this particular person does not believe in God. And this SMS was very clear as he read it to me, that this person was kind of challenging the Christians and saying, well, now where is your God now? Why has this happened? Does your God not answer prayers? You know, and how could your God do such a thing to this family, to this young girl? And these are powerful thoughts. They are very reasonable thinking. People think like this when things like that. And for this person, this incident, this series of events, it was strengthening their resolve not to believe in God. It was their reason why I won't believe in God. And honestly, as my friend was reading this text to me, for me, he was asking good questions, and I have no right, I have no desire to judge him or to correct him or to kind of discount his arguments with the better argument and all of that. And as I listened to this text message and through my own sadness of what I was going through, my deep disappointment, I felt like I heard a whisper. And this is not something that I've spoken about a lot since then, but as I sat there, I didn't quite understand myself, you know. Why is this happening? This beautiful young girl, this family who've already experienced such a tragedy, and it's taken them such a long time to come to terms with their first daughter's tragic accident. And where am I going to find comfort, and how am I going to give comfort in the midst of all of this? And these are the thoughts that were going through my mind as I listened to this guy's text. But at the same time, this whisper got louder and louder in my head and in my heart. And the whisper was simply this: who are you going to trust? Who are you going to trust? You see, the reality was that this situation was too much for me to handle. That's the truth. And as I realized there, as I sat there, I kind of have two choices. I'm either going to trust in the rationale of human disappointment. I'm either going to trust in human reasoning. I'm either going to trust in human questioning. Good questions. I think people have the right to ask questions. People have asked me, why do things like this happen? These are good questions to ask. I don't think we must dismiss the questioning. I'm angry with God. Why did God let this happen? Why did God not intervene as we had asked Him to intervene? I could trust in the rationale that asked all those questions. Or I could trust in God. I could trust in God. Or I could still be angry with God. I've learned something about anger, you know. I've been angry with my wife before. She's been angry with me a lot. But we still love each other. We still trust each other. I can be upset the fact that we asked God to intervene, and He never intervened as we would want Him to intervene. Is it too much for God to have done this thing? You understand? But at the same time, I get to choose how I'm going to internalize. I'm going to choose how I'm going to process this heartache, this circumstance that for all intents and purposes is too much for me to handle. I get to choose how I'm going to endure the pain of what has taken place in their lives, in this family's life, in the family's lives that we confront, in the family's lives that I know of and I don't know of, and what I see on TV as I watch people being displaced around our world. I get to choose how I'm going to process that stuff. For some, they blame God. It's God's fault. They turn their back on God. For Christ followers, these pivotal moments can be a moment for them to say, well, if God can't do that, why should I serve this God? And so their anger, their frustration, their trust turns away from God. And they can't accept the fact that they're having to understand that something that is too hard for them to handle is being unfolded in their lives. And again, as I said, I can't judge people like that. I don't have a desire to judge people like that because I know people like that. They're good people. They're good people, and I care about them. But it's their choice. It's their choice. They're gonna express themselves in that way. But for me, I can't put energy into that. Life for me is not always simple. Life for me is not always just a simple cause and effect kind of thing. Life sometimes for me is mysterious. It's confusing. It can be completely fascinating and completely heartbreaking. And the only thing that makes sense to me, the only thing that I can kind of turn to that actually kind of, that computes to some degree in situations like this is for me to say, well, I don't understand it all, and I don't like it all, and it makes me angry, and it makes me ask questions, but what else can I do? Where else can I turn? But to trust God. To trust God. You see, trusting myself, trusting the philosophy of the world out there, trusting the anger of somebody else, that won't provide me with any kind of consolation. That won't bring any redemption or any healing. Invariably, all that's going to do is aggravate and gather more momentum and more steam. And so for me, I need to believe in God. I need to trust that God is good. And to trust that only He can redeem my brokenness and the brokennesses of the world that we're living in. You see, we have a choice about how we handle life's contradictions. We have a choice. We can choose as to how we're going to channel our frustration, our hurt, and our pain. We're either going to, in a sense, get in a rowboat, put our hands on the oars of life and try and pull ourselves out of our sorrow. We're going to try to pull ourselves out of our anger. We're going to try to pull ourselves out of our disappointment. We're going to just row this boat with sheer bloody-minded determination to pull ourselves out. Or we can put our trust in God. And we can take our sorrow and our despair and our anger and disappointments and hoist them like sails. Say, this is how I'm feeling, God. Now let the wind of your Spirit blow into these things, into these aspects of my life, so that I will find redemption, that I will find healing. Folks, this is uncommon. This is not unusual. And the saints of old processed this stuff like this. In Psalm 13, a psalm of David, listen to David's psalm. Listen to his anguish. O Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you look the other way? How long must I struggle with anguish in my soul, with sorrow in my heart every day? God, how long will my enemy have the upper hand? Turn and answer me, O Lord my God. Restore the sparkle to my eyes, or I will die. Don't let my enemies gloat, saying, we have defeated him. Don't let them rejoice at my downfall, but I trust in your unfailing love. There it is. I trust in your unfailing love. I will rejoice because you have rescued me. I will sing to the Lord because he is good to me. Folks, that's one psalm. I could sit here and read psalms, a lot of psalms for a long time that speak of the anguish of the writer, of the pain, of the circumstances that they're going through. And all of those psalms, almost without exception, they end by saying, I'm going to trust in God. Because the reality is, who else are we going to trust? Who are we going to trust in the circumstances of our lives that are too much for us to handle? Who else are we going to trust? When I stood in the hospital this past Monday morning, even though I felt deeply dissatisfied with the fact that our prayers were not answered as we would like them to be answered, as I sat there and listened to this man's text message, I realized all I really have left is to trust God. That's the only next step that I could possibly take. Trusting that I could handle this situation. Somebody said to me, Mark, what are you going to do? I don't know what to do. I'm going to trust God. That's what I'm going to do. It's the only option that's left for me in the circumstances of this kind. And my questions will go unanswered. And perhaps we will feel naked and exposed to the world as they would potentially, have a go at our faith and at our God. All I've got left is to put my trust in Jesus. That's all I got. That's all I can do. You see, as I kind of reflected on this through the course of this week in preparation for this morning and in some of the stuff that I've been listening and watching over the last while, I realized there's something here that can happen, that can cause some sort of learning. And for some, it may be too early to start saying, well, what can I learn or what can I find out of this? But what's going to kind of get me to trust God even further than just simply saying, I'm going to trust? You see, this is what I've realized, that making a decision, a choice to take the energy, the disappointment, and saying, God, I'm going to trust you even though I don't understand, even though I don't like, even though I'm angry, even though I'm disappointed. Lord, I'm going to trust you. You see, what trusting does, it takes me to his presence. Yeah. By trusting in God, we will be brought into his presence. My trusting in God, my trusting in him will bring me into his presence. You see, when we trust him, we experience his presence. I mean, let's face it. I mean, if we're going to be ruthlessly honest this morning, when we're going through like high times, everything's going right. How many of us remember to trust God? You remember the story of the 10 lepers? Jesus comes to the 10 lepers. What can I do for you? And Jesus says, go, you're healed. And the 10 rush off to show the priest, look, we're healed. We can be reintegrated into society. We no longer, as lepers, have to be outside in colonies. One leper turns around and goes back and thanks Jesus for healing him. Often when we're riding the high road of provision, success, whatever you want to call it, we forget about God. Let's be honest. I mean, even some of the biggest heathens who don't believe in God, you watch when things go wrong. Not too long ago, a few years ago, I got into an aeroplane, and sitting across the aisle, just on the other side of the aisle, was a person who looked down the aisle and looked at me, and say, hey, Hal, Mark, nice to see you. I come to Grace. Ah, nice to see you. I'm so glad you're on this aeroplane. I thought, I wonder why. Now this aeroplane will be fine. And I thought, well, maybe I've sinned. And we're all going to die together. Hey, listen, if I'm on the airplane, don't think that's any guarantee. Remember Paul last week? He was shipwrecked 3 times. I reckon if I got down to the harbor and Paul was about to get on the ship, I'd say, if Paul's getting on the ship, I'm not getting on the ship. So be careful of that kind of thinking, But you know what I mean? We can neglect God sometimes. But sometimes when we're in these kind of situations, when we find ourselves in the storms of life, and we trust Him, it takes us to His presence. Craig Rochelle says this: never let the presence of a storm cause you to doubt the presence of God. Yeah. Never let the presence of a storm cause you to doubt the presence of God. And so sometimes when we get in a storm, the presence of the storm, we sometimes can kind of dispel the presence of God, but invariably, that's when God, in a sense, shows up in a very different and discernible way. For me, when I was in this hospital and looked at this man's SMS, God whispered and said to me, who are you going to trust? I felt Him there, right then and then. It's easy to forget who's in the boat with us. There's the story, I mentioned it very briefly earlier on in my intro, in Mark chapter 4, verse 37. It says this, but soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat and it began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him up shouting, Teacher, don't you care that we're going down? Don't you care that we're going to drown? Sorry. When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, silence, be still. Suddenly the wind stopped and there was a great calm. And then he asked them, why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? It's inevitable we're going to go through storms. It's inevitable as Christ followers we'll think that Jesus has gone to sleep in the storm. But that's the time that we put our trust in Him. That's the time when we realize that He is there in the storm with us, even though we feel it is too much to handle. I think that's for me one of the things that I'm learning by simply saying, you know what? I'm not going to take my disappointment, my anger, my unfulfilled expectations, my unanswered prayers, and make them push me away from God. I'm going to choose to take those things, to set sail, to push me toward God. The second thing is something that Paul the Apostle went through. In 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and chapter 12, verse 8 through 9, Paul goes through this troubling time in his life. He uses the metaphor, a thorn in the flesh. 3 different times he says, I begged the Lord to take it away. Each time he said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I'm glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. Someone once said, you're either about to enter into a storm, you're in a storm, or you're exiting a storm. And that may be true. I think there's an element of truth to that. And when I read this particular verse, I love what Paul says. He says, I boast about my weaknesses. He says, I don't boast about the storm. I don't boast about the thorn in the flesh. But the thing that I realize is that when I go through this phase, and the implication here is that there are phases in Paul's life that he went through, that he would say, and Paul went through some stuff, folks. So for him to say, God, take this away from me, it was serious stuff for him. And Paul goes ahead and he says, you know what? This stuff makes me feel weak. And when I feel weak, then I'm strong. Why does he say that? It sounds completely counter-cultural, counter-thinking. The reason why he says it's because it's there that I trust God more than I'm aware of trusting Him when things aren't going in my life. I think as we think about these things, from my point of view, as I look at that, and some of the things that get said about circumstances such as I'm currently living through and working through right now, it would make sense to say, you know what? If God was going to answer prayers on a basis of merit, who deserves to get their prayer answered? I'd say Paul did. And I'd also say in this case, this family with this girl that's just passed away, I think they deserve to get, and yet it seems it doesn't happen that way. It seems like merit doesn't really count. And that causes me some confusion as well. Doesn't it cause you? I mean, why them? You know, if it was an evil person, it'll be okay. There's this contradiction, isn't it? John chapter 5. Listen to this. Listen to this. You want to know something that's going to trouble you? Let me trouble you some more. Afterward, Jesus returned to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holidays. Inside the city near the sheep gate was the pool of Bethesda, with 5 covered porches. Crowds of sick people, blind, lame, or paralyzed, lay on the porches. One of the men lying there had been sick for 38 years. When Jesus saw him and knew he had been ill for a long time, he asked him, "Would you like to get well?" "I can't, sir," the sick man said, "for I have no one to put me into the pool when the water bubbles up. Someone else gets there ahead of me." Jesus told him, "Stand up, pick up your mat and walk." Instantly, the man was healed. Unimaginable for this man. Unimaginable. The tradition was that an angel bubbles this water and the first person in gets healed. I mean, that's like God never said that one situations. But anyway, that was the superstition. That's what the people believed. And this guy could never get in first, and so he could never get healed. Imagine that, waiting for the water to bubble, you're paralyzed and you can't get in. Jesus comes. What do you want? Do you want to be healed? For sure. Get up and go. Well, now, here's the part that really is troubling. The Bible tells us clearly there were lots of sick people and Jesus heals one. Doesn't that trouble you? Don't you say to yourself, that's not fair? Why didn't he heal everybody? Why did he just heal the one? Why didn't he feed everybody? Why didn't he provide for everybody? It seems as if Jesus doesn't engage our world like we would engage it if we had that kind of power. I don't understand that, and I'm not even going to try to explain that, except to say that the second learning that I learn in situations like this, and when I discover in the life of Paul, is that my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. That's the second learning for me. I can't answer these questions. And I have to accept the fact that there's going to be mystery. I have to accept the fact that one day when I seek Jesus face to face, I will know him as he is known. I will know these things. But until then, I have to trust. I have to revert. I've got to get the grace of God to blow into the sails of my despair, of my sadness, and of my trouble. So what do we do? What do we do about these things? I think we weep, we ask questions, we feel the despair, we acknowledge that we're in over our head. I think that we have no option but to trust God. Oh, well, we have another option. We can turn our back on God and blame God. But that's not going to get you anywhere. That's not going to get you anywhere. I think that as we trust God, in spite of what we're experiencing, and seek him, we will find his redemption. We will find strength in our weakness. And I think that as time goes by, healing will come. And even though the pain and the memories of our past hard experiences will be forever with us, we'll grow in our faith. We'll grow in our confidence. We'll grow in his presence. Before I close off this morning, I'd like to give just some thoughts for those of us who get to walk alongside people who are in moments of despair. See, so often, as Christ followers, as the Christian community, in our sincerity, in our desire to be helpful, we actually end up aggravating the situation. I sadly have been through too many sadnesses with people who've faced incredible things, and some Christian comes alongside them and tells them something that God told them to tell them. there was sin in your life, or Jesus wants to do this, and, if you're only your husband, and all this kind of useless information. So let me give you some practical ways that we as those who are there to comfort and to strengthen those in sadness. Let me give you some thoughts that you could do. The first thing is, don't offer answers. Even if your answer is brilliant, we don't want to hear it. We actually don't want to hear it. You know what I mean? They don't help. And invariably, they're not very good. Let me just say that. I mean, I've been around on this stuff for a long, long time. Secondly, offer presents, not gifts, presents. You. Be there. Listen, help practically, and listen some more. When they start weeping with them. When they laugh and recall a story of what the person that they're mourning, then you laugh and recall a story. But you're really there to be present. And sometimes being present is not being there, because sometimes they need some time out. Which leads me to the third thing. Don't make it about you. Don't make it about you. So often people say, I know what you're going through. Well, unless you have been through what they've been through, don't say, I know what you're going through. You have no idea. I've sat with people who've gone through stuff, like this family. I haven't been through that. So for me to say to them, as an expression of attempting to be sympathetic, to say, I know what you're going through. No, I don't. I don't. So don't try and say that. Just say, I'm sorry. What can I do? Be quiet. If you can't say, always just be quiet. That's a gift. You know what I mean? We really, as a society, we feel like we've got to talk, to make everything better. No. Just be there. Be present. Be kind. Be gracious. Be praying quietly in yourself. Be loving. Give food. As we finish off this morning, I wonder how many of you sitting here are going through something like this yourself. You feel like it's too much to bear. Roxy, I'm going to ask you just to drop the lights a bit. I know we never rehearsed this. I just wonder if you're in a place like this morning. I'd love to pray with you. Pray for you. That you would somehow hear the whispers of the Spirit. Allow Him to, allow the grace of God to blow into the sails of your anger, your disappointment, your hurt, your pain, your sadness, your unfulfilled expectation. So we're going to take a moment. I'm going to ask those of you who would be in that situation just to stand for a moment. If you feel like you're in a circumstance that is just too much for you to bear, I'd like you to stand and we want to pray for you. We don't often do this at our church, but if you would look around and see people standing, if you would just go to one or two of those people, one of you go to them and just put your hands on them while I pray. Just make your way to. Don't let anybody be standing alone. I don't want you to talk to them. I don't want you to say hello to them. I just want you to put your hand on them, just to touch them. Father, we just thank you today that as things come across our lives that we feel are too much to handle, we can turn to you. I ask you for these people who are standing, who find themselves in one of these situations right now, that they would feel the grace of God, the wind of your Spirit, into their pain, their disappointment, into their hurt, into their unfulfilled expectations. Would you just breathe the breath of comfort, of hope? Would you light the fire of trust? And that in this moment, Father, that they will know that they would know that they would know that you are helping them and directing them. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's all stand together. Father, we thank you for this morning. We thank you that as we leave this place, we can trust in you. I pray for all of us in this room that we would find ways to put our trust in the one who is trustworthy. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.